Hello everyone. My name is Miguel. Me and my team, Andries and Arnold, we worked on a team collective culture. This is a pretty complex team that led us to a few questions, like how do people collectively express their culture? How do they color their surroundings? In order to find some answers, we approached this matter via 4 types of public spaces in which people in our vision can demonstrate their collectiveness. We considered them as being equally important. I'm going to start with just showing the part of Brooklyn that we all looked at. So from East New York on the right with Howard Bay to Red Hook over in the west. The first spaces I'm going to talk about are community spaces. Community spaces such as neighborhood parks serve as a social and recreational focal point for neighborhoods. They may offer a wide range of facilities and passive or active recreation like sports. In response to demographic and cultural elements of the surrounding neighborhoods, with a strong possibility for interaction with nature. Community space may consist of playgrounds, sporting facilities, community gardens, community centers, which we have mapped here for the entire area we looked at. You see they're pretty widespread, and as one of the previous groups said, that community gardens are also very apparent in the center of the area. Now, these are some images of these community spaces. They are very different in appearance. We have community gardens like this one or this one, which are empty for now. We have sports fields over here, public parks like this, and this is the Red Hook community farm. The first type of community space I'm going to talk about are the community gardens. Community gardens provide a green place in urban space. They provide fresh produce and plants, as well as sort of satisfying labor for the neighborhood. They are mostly open to the general public, but there's also a dependency upon lease agreements with the management body of the park, which relates to a community garden membership. To become a member, you often have to pay an annual fee, which varies from around $10 to $30. That depends on the neighborhood where you live. Another requirement is that you have to be an inhabitant of the neighborhood, which is quite obvious. Now, the openness of these community gardens isn't the same as the openness of like a public park as Columbus Park. Most of the community gardens are fenced for reasons of social control to protect the small farms of the inhabitants that produce their vegetables in the garden. So it's quite logical. Now, the questions we asked with this was, what can you do as a designer in terms of community gardens? Can you allow the sort of exclusiveness of these boundaries, but design them differently so that these boundaries can become something that invites? Like we see in this picture here, where the fence in a certain way is used in a certain way to invite the neighborhood inhabitants. This one is also open, not all the time, mostly they close at 4 o'clock. Now this is this is another example of a fence surrounding a community garden, which was also open at that time, but you needed a key. We were lucky to see that there were people inside, so we could talk to them. This is another type of community garden which we visited together with Manuel Avila, who is here, I guess. Here we pose ourselves with the question, could you interfere in something which exists only of an informal group and that doesn't want a high-end design? Do you need to become like more a gardener, less a designer, and more an inhabitant, and less someone who is on the sideline? In this case, we thought of Manuel as being very inspiring, because the work he did there was almost becoming like a gardener, less than a designer, in our vision. Now, another type of space we looked at was so-called representative space. This space often tends to provide a cityscape with a certain credibility and prestige by building on a sense of character, shared identity, and a forum for public activity. There are formal public spaces with strong symmetric design language to represent the power of a city, of a nation, of a people. This comes from another era of politics, but it still works. They mean something for people, and people start to relate to them. Some of the examples we saw in Brooklyn were Columbus Park, with this big statue over here. This is another picture of Columbus Park. This is the Grand Army Plaza with the big Brooklyn Library in the neighborhood. Now, Grand Army Plaza was designed as an entrance for Prospect Park, of which you see a picture on the right below. We noticed there's a shift in representational space in terms of big classical ideas, a shift to the contemporary. Nowadays we don't have these powerful institutions anymore, and the representation of new public spaces has changed to more local and more temporal. Things can be built up quickly and go away again. Now the questions we pose here: so what can a designer do to create new public spaces? Is it limited to small-scale design such as I'm going to skip this, sorry. Is it limited to small-scale design such as a painted public space, which is the picture in the middle here? Visible? Or something temporal, like a container bar, which you see a picture on the right here. Yeah, I'm going to skip this as well, sorry. Next I will talk about another type of space which we call the streetscape. Wandering the streets of Brooklyn, we observed that there's a diverse and active urban culture that lives on these streets. Whether it is an expression of discontent with institutions, like a mural, which you see over here, or more poetry on the large facades, which we see over here. We see that built environment can serve as a so-called artboard for its inhabitants. A simple text on a wall can attract people and inform them that there's, for example, a stoop sale on the block just around the corner. One could say that the streetscape also has the capacity to generate public urban activity and invite people to interact with their environment. Just the width of the sidewalk can create the possibility for people to use the streets in more diverse ways that may not have been intentioned for by designers. We held a simple experiment on a corner sidewalk at Flatbush Avenue, where the available space is large enough to hold 13 students to sit in a circle and eat their hamburgers. Now these activities are often unintentional and momentarily, but they still happen. It still can happen, although sidewalks aren't that big of a design issue. Now the question we pose here is, could this capability of the streetscape be more profound if a designer was asked to redesign Brooklyn's sidewalks, or do sidewalks and streets need to be designed like the great parkways that cross Brooklyn's grids, like the Eastern Parkway. Another and the last space we looked at was the so-called virtual realm. Thinking about collective culture in a space, we must not forget that there is also the internet. The internet can be viewed as a space, but not a physical space. It is a collective space. For some neighborhoods in Brooklyn, which we tried to show you here, with a mapping of blocks, that talk about certain neighborhoods. What is striking here is that there are a lot of blocks in the western part of Brooklyn and more or less in the center, but much less in the east. Now, this trend could be explained by the flow of people coming along with gentrification progress, which the other group talked about, and as a reaction to that, for example, in Bed-Stuy. Another significant fact is that there aren't almost any. Okay, sorry, I talked about this. No, the public realm is a relatively new public space, which supports collective culture in general. People can join online communities that reflect certain ideas of belonging. The internet is an easy way to reach out ideas to a large group of people and bring them together for a common goal. Now, this is a summary of the questions I mentioned earlier. Thank you for your attention.